Welcome back to My Seminary Life. I'm your host, Brandon Knight. Today is the finale to our series, Apologetics 201. We've been looking at the relationship between faith and science, talking about creation theories, new faith movements that claim to be Christian and scientific, but aren't really. We've talked about the watchmaker illustration and broke that down. Today is a big send-off on the importance to continue to look into faith and science, because the world of science, there's always new information. And as Christians, we need to learn how to have a proper relationship with new, changing information, especially as it helps us to better understand our world around us, and therefore also how to worship God better as a result of it. And I brought the guy on who I think every time he's on the show, faith and science comes up at some point because it's that important to him. Pastor Will is back with us today. Hi, how are you doing, Pastor Will?
I am great. Thanks for having me back, Brandon. Thanks for your work in this. Yeah, it is important to me. But the irony thing is that I went to college thinking I was going to be a marine biologist and go into sciences, and I made C's in biology and labs, and then had to pivot. And I was like, I guess I'm not a scientist. I can't handle all this science and all this math, and I don't want to be stuck in a lab. I want to be out in the world. I thought I was going to do marine biology so I could play with dolphins and surf, but that wasn't the case. I learned fast. That's not the job. So I pivoted to ministry and youth ministry and congregational ministry and pastoral ministry. But since science is so important to our world and culture, and the narrative is the big meta narrative that drives everything in our world these days. Religion is important, but I think people, I don't know about post-COVID or 2020s, who knows, but in terms of like science being the main factor that drives a lot of things in this world, I think it's important for religion and faith in our congregations to engage with it and to have dialogue with it and to explore it. And I geek out on the big questions and get a lot of energy at what science can prevent and how faith can connect with it and whether it can prove or disprove, all those things. I love getting into the weeds of those things. So yeah, that the irony is that I did not get good grades in science in school, but yet here I am helping create healthy conversations between faith and science.
Which is also very important because, as we've covered throughout this series, there's, depending on what world what part of Christianity you come from, there may not be a very good relationship between faith and science. And we're hoping on the back end of this that there will be a better conversation, better communication.
Yeah. And I think, I'm a kind of a pastor at heart. So like sometimes you need a poet, sometimes you need a prophet, sometimes you need someone to be an activist, sometimes you need someone to be an artist. I think my approach to ministry, life, relationships are very pastoral based in the sense that provide pastoral care, guidance, shepherding. And so while I may not be the smartest person in the room or have all the answers, I do seek to help shepherd and guide and bring kind of pastoral care when people wrestle with hard questions or have crises with those questions, and to be there in that space to give them permission to ask questions and to wrestle with things, and to say you're not alone in this because a lot of people have done this. And guess what? There's a lot of great resources out there to help you sort through these things. And so you're not alone. So that's kind of been my kind of calling and spiritual gift, and how I've kind of postured myself and the ministries that I've been part of over the years.
And I think it's also very helpful. This is for free listeners and those of you watching on YouTube. This really has nothing to do with the episode, but I think it's also helpful to know where you fit in the role. Scripture talks about how as believers, we're a body of Christ, and each body part, we have like our own specific role within that, how we function, how we do the work of the kingdom, right? And I think sometimes we get in this headspace, especially nowadays, where we have to be able to do it all. And like, it's good to be an activist for what is, what matters to you. And it's good to have a shepherding heart in your home with your family, but you shouldn't have to feel like you have to be great at all of it. Like, you're good at this pastoral shepherding, and that's amazing, and that's helpful when it comes to, you know, guiding people through life. I have more of like a teaching mentality, and
Right.
you know, we need people who can be able to teach well and to work with people on educating them. So that has nothing to do with the rest of the episode, but yeah, it's worth highlighting. I think.
Yeah.
Um, and we need scientists. There's the pivot. We need scientists too, right? To help
Yeah.
us better understand this world, this beautiful world that we have. I want to start by asking you, and you talked about it a little bit here with college. So you went into college or university initially with this mentality of becoming a marine biologist. And longtime listeners of Systematic Geekology know that you're also, like, your whole life you've been a sci-fi fan. Science fiction has been like one of your, you know, Star Wars particularly, one of your big geek genres you like.
Yeah.
So has it been like this lifelong love? Have you had this lifelong love for the sciences, like through even starting all the way back for childhood, or when did this become like an important part of your ministry?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think yeah, I think faith and deeper questions have always been a part of my life and important to me. I guess when I matured a little bit, kind of late high school, early college, I started taking that a little bit more seriously. And then my imagination and my fandom have always been like sci-fi. But I think it's like looking at the stars, asking the questions: Are we alone? What's our place in this universe? Those kind of big questions. Those kind of questions of awe and wonder, which science
Okay.
leans into, and faith leans into. And I've always, and I've been saying it for a long time, I think that's good common ground for faith and science to kind of play together and work together and dialogue together, is this kind of common ground of awe and wonder. We both look at things and
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I want to know more about that. Man, that's drawing me into something deeper. What is it that is
Mm-hmm.
making me step back and, gasp at the beauty or the wonder of it all. So yeah, I think those together, and then eventually, I think being a youth pastor and shepherding churches and being pastoral towards people's questions. There's the hard Bible questions: What about this? What about that? What about Jesus? What about miracles? But in our kind of growing culture where science is seen as the final authority on things, people are trying to reconcile or think through, how did these scientific discoveries relate to what I'm reading in the Bible and what our
Mm-hmm.
faith or our creeds say we believe. And so as I do Q&As or teaching or pastor in the hot seat, or ask me anything kind of thing, ask Pastor Will and
Mm-hmm.
anything, I noticed that a lot of science questions: How does this relate to Genesis? How does this relate to Bible? How does
Hmm.
this relate to miracles? How does this relate to what Jesus did? I was like, oh, I bet there's other people who have thought through this. Where are the resources to go deeper in that? So that's where that kind of drew, knowing from like working with youth and them asking questions, to then disciples of all ages in the congregation wrestling with things.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been really kind of question positive, that say like, hey, if you have a question, bring it.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean I know the answer, but maybe I bet perhaps people have wrestled with that before, and there's some resources out there to think through that in a healthy way. And you're not going to be shamed for asking a question, or you shouldn't. I will never tell people don't ask questions,
Mm-hmm.
unless there's like an agenda behind it. They're trying to trap you, kind of like the Pharisees did with Jesus. Or
Fair.
if people are like, hey, Pastor Will, I have a question, and you're trying to trap, I'm like, hey, what's behind that question? Or are you really, but if it's a genuine, authentic question you have that you're wrestling with, man, let's explore that together. I'm very curious about those kinds of things. So that's what helped me kind of go down that road.
Throughout this run of episodes, we've also been doing a little bit of a critique on how we do apologetics, with this like mindset of this critique of like, I'm going to know all the right answers in order to get someone saved, right? And it's, you talk about being a place where you can ask questions. You want to be a safe space
Yeah.
for people to ask questions. And I think it's amazing how often, as how many Christians who do like apologetics or evangelism, they actually are coming at it like a Pharisee. They're not asking questions to get to know the person or ask questions to better understand their worldview. They're asking questions to trap people. And that's actually
Yeah.
really sad. And we have 4 books in the Bible that show us over and over again not to do that. And yet we need to be a safer space.
Yeah, it's that classic bait and switch. It's like, yeah, I want to know your questions so I can tell you how you should answer them, or shame you for doing that. And then also using the word just Pharisee. Let's be honest, like we don't be anti-Semitic. Like Pharisees are set up as the kind of villain of the Bible. But I think Jesus was a Pharisee. That's his tradition. That was his denomination. That was kind of his approach to doing Judaism. But the Pharisees in Jesus' day, or the religious establishment of his day, were threatened by him. So they're trying to find a way to either trap him, make him less popular, get him arrested, to get him off the scene. But it didn't work. Jesus often answered a question with a question to try to get behind what was really going on. And sometimes I will do that too with faith and science. Like, okay, do you believe in God? Well, what do you mean by God? Do you believe in evolution? Well, what do you mean by evolution? There's usually a question behind the question, or how you define that, I think, is important to kind of think through as you're working through all those things. And so if this goes out and I shares this, there might be some people in my algorithms or circles who don't know what you mean by apologetics. Do you mean we just go around apologizing for things, Brandon?
Right. That
Do we
is
just be highly apologetic for how we're acting in the world?
Honestly, I wish it would mean that, because I feel like we could use a lot more apologizing in the world from Christians. I think Christians would do well to apologize a little bit more. But for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the term, so this word apologetics, it is based off of a Greek word that comes up in the Bible. It means to give a defense. It gets translated a couple of different ways into English, because this Greek is 2,000 years old and dead. It is a dead language. So it translates into a couple different ways in our language. A common way it comes up is to give a defense. So basically what I think it's Peter, what St. Peter is teaching in his letter is that Christians need to be ready to answer questions. That's kind of the defense, not to be defensive, but to not to be defensive, but to offer answers when people ask questions. And not like how we were just talking about, of like we're trying to entrap somebody, but to, again, as Pastor Will's talking about, be in a safe space to, okay, well, tell me about Jesus. Sure, I can tell you who Jesus is and why I believe in him, without it being like a gotcha kind of scenario.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would add to that?
Yeah, that's really good. Like, yeah, I think, we could go down a whole road about being defensive with things. I've been told that I get defensive at times, but no, I think, quick side story. When I was doing my psychological exam to get into seminary, I did the psych exam. I'm sitting across from the doctor, and the psychologist, and he was like, as I'm reading over this tends to, it's kind of sharing that you tend to be defensive. And I went, no, I'm not. And I went, oh, I see what you did there, Doc. I see what you did.
Well done,
you
doctor.
Well done. You got me. Yes. But no, like, I think often what has gotten the church and religion in trouble when it comes to this conversation between faith and science, we often are on the defensive, feel like we have to defend or disprove or those kinds of things, from Galileo and the Catholic Church to all the way through. Like, we're just going to be extremely defensive because we're scared we're going to lose prestige and integrity or money or influence. So we're scared we're going to lose those things. So we have to defend ourselves and get defensive or attack and tear the other thing down so that we don't look like we're not king of the hill or whatever. So I think that's a lot of the conflict around faith and science comes down to, on both sides, science and faith. If people getting defensive, they're scared they're going to lose grant money or lose offerings or whatever. So they feel like they have to set up this wall or defensiveness against it, rather than let's come to the table, let's share a meal, I'm legitimately curious about the questions that you have and how we can work together on those things. Doesn't mean there's not tension. Doesn't mean there's different answers. Doesn't mean we all have to do kumbaya at the end of it all. But to be genuinely curious what you're wrestling with and see if we can come to a common ground. So
I like that. Yeah.
yeah.
And going way back to when you were talking about science and faith being both this like place where awe and wonder meets, you know,
Yeah.
when we're being defensive or when we're trying to entrap people, we're actually like steering them away from that moment of awe and wonder in the face of God.
Yeah.
And it also reminds me of, I think it's Psalm 8. It's either 8 or 10. It's a really early one where David has this great like existential moment and he's writing about looking up in the heavens and he makes
Oh, it's
that
eight.
famous,
It's eight.
it's
Yeah,
8.
that's eight.
It's that
We use
famous
that a lot with his faith and science conversation.
uh
When I
who
consider the
am
heavens,
I?
look at the
Yeah.
stars. Yeah. Who hasn't, like at a campfire at night, we were just looking for the aurora, how do you pronounce it?
Aurora
Aurora.
Borealis.
That's it. We were looking for that. And so all these, when I consider the heaven, look at the heavens, and I'm like in awe, who am
Mm-hmm.
I in this universe? Who is God? Is there a God? Is there a purpose? Does this have a moral arc to the universe? We all ask those questions when we look. So Psalm 8 just captures that perfectly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I love it that it's like in that psalm, David is like, who am I? But it's not like this dwindle. It doesn't turn into this like spiral of I'm nothing. It's like he has a proper understanding of like who God is in his relation and in David's relationship to the rest of the created world. And it brings him to worship. And that's amazing. And that's what we should, that's what we should be going for, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure.
Good.
Yeah. So you've talked about being, a safe space, whether it's for people who don't know, who aren't part of faith, or even just people in your congregation who have questions, and how very often it's related to some kind of like faith and science kind of discussion. Has there been anything else that your church has been involved with when it comes to doing ministry or doing work related to faith and science?
Oh yeah. So I think in my church in South Carolina, back in like 2006, 2008, as I was doing these kind of pastor in the hot seats Q&A, let me know what your questions are and let's wrestle with those together. Try to create an environment where people know it's a safe space to ask questions or wrestle with doubt or explore,
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this book, I'll show it up, that came onto the scene.
Ooh.
Francis Collins, The Language of God, coming out in 2006 is when it came out. And I read, someone said, oh, Will, you should read this book. And Dr. Francis Collins shares his story of how sometimes you hear this story of like people of faith encounter science, they become an atheist because science is more reliable or answers questions better than faith does. Well, he came out, he was an atheist. And then when he did his residency in the hospital here at UNC, he encountered some patients that challenged him on his disbelief. And so he had to ask some bigger questions about what do I believe or not believe, and had this conversion experience, read some C.S. Lewis, did some exploring of his own, and became like a born again Christian. And so then he was determined to say like, well, both faith and science can have a healthy relationship and conversation with one another. So the language of God is as a scientist presents evidence for belief. And then he became the presidential assigned head of the Human Genome Project, the map, the genome and all of humanity and things. So he became big wig on the scientific stage when it comes to that. And then his work there then led to him create an organization called BioLogos, which is a great resource. Their website and their podcast is called Language of God. Is a great resource for churches. It has curriculum and videos and stuff. People are wrestling with what is science saying about the world and the age of the universe and evolution and cosmology and how that relates to our faith and what the Bible is saying or not saying. So it's a fantastic resource when it comes to that. So I read that book and then started exploring some of that with my church in South Carolina. Then when I came to North Carolina, I came to Holy Trinity. We're right on the doorstep of UNC, a research institution. We're right down the road from Duke, which has major hospital and research and science, and we're down the road from NC State as well, which is kind of a engineering school as well. So we're in this research triangle, and a lot of members of my church are either professors or scientists, and it ended up happening that one of the members of my church, Dr. Al Goshaw, particle physicist at Duke, who works at CERN over in Switzerland for half the year, was on the Higgs boson team to help not discover, but kind of prove the God particle, the Higgs boson particle. And so knowing also, I was like, oh boy, we've just leveled up a little bit in terms of who we're having these discussions with. But again, that pastoral approach, look, I'm not going to compete in my knowledge of physics or particle physics or quantum physics when it comes with Al Goshaw, but we can provide a resource and have conversations and link people together. So we did some conversations with some book studies and open panels and Q&As and small groups around some of the conversations around faith and science. Eventually we got a grant from Fuller Seminary and to engage deeper into faith and science questions with young adults and students and emerging adults, which can be from like 16 to 30. Yeah, I feel like I'm still an emerging adult,
right.
But emerging something, something's emerging from me, but I think, so that helped us, like, really that money and intentionality helped us go deeper and asking what are people wrestling with in terms of the questions, and what resources are out there to help people with them in a healthy, not to be defensive or to slam people's questions, but who are answering these these questions in a healthy way. So that's really kind of where my history behind it. And we still having conversation around it. And there's another resource out there called Science for the Church, which kind of emerged out of this grant that we got. They're another resource like BioLogos that has a weekly email and resources to present and to help churches have healthy conversations around scientific questions. And BioLogos has grown. Francis Collins is still partnering with it. He was a big part of him and Fauci were friends, and other people, and he was on the morning talk shows about COVID development and watching science in real time and vaccines, and there's a lot of stuff going on with there. So and they have a conference every 2 years that kind of floats around the country, and so their conference was here last April 17th through 19th in Raleigh, right down the road from me, about 30 minutes. So I was able to attend that conference and hear Dr. Collins speak and do a live podcast. And they had keynote speakers, they had small groups, workshops. I even helped I led a workshop with Science for the Church at the conference, specifically targeted for ministers who are in congregations who want to engage science deeper and to have healthy conversations around that. So we have some scientists on the panel and ministers on the panel and campus ministers there, because young adults are more open and exploring that stuff in the college time than perhaps older adults. But yeah, so that was a very fruitful conference. It was good seeing that kind of play out live in front of you.
Nice.
Which is kind of good, hearing some of the things going on. And I'll share more in a little bit, kind of what I got out of that conference, or what I heard, what people were asking about. But we can talk about that in a little bit.
Sure. So just so you know, listeners, to the best of my ability, I'm going to have as many of these resources as Pastor Will has brought up in the description of this episode. For sure, you'll be able to find the link to BioLogos, because we are going to talk we're going to keep talking about them and the conference here in a moment, if you ever want to scout any of this information. But a lot of this, as you're talking about your church's ministry, both in South Carolina and North Carolina at Holy Trinity, a lot of this has come back to resourcing, either answering questions that the congregation may have, or, helping ministers be able to talk about this stuff with their own congregation.
Right.
I have a question for you, and this is a safe space. So
I'll try not to get defensive.
my question is, we're talking about BioLogos. In my world, or at least the world that I've come from. There's another ministry that works very hard at getting resources into the hands of ministers, and that is Answers in Genesis, Ken Ham and the whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
From your vantage point, what's your perspective on Answer in Genesis, if anything?
I'm not as familiar with that resource. I do know when we were going deeper with this grant and we were becoming a little bit more public in some of our events and podcasting and stuff, and working with the North Carolina Synod and having some
Mm-hmm.
people talk with congregations, I did get in the mail like free copies of Ken Ham's books and answers that I was like, how did I get on this mailing list? Someone just mailed this to us, no letter,
Interesting.
no invitation for conversation. Just here, if you read this, maybe this will fix you kind of thing. So
Nice.
again, the pastoral approach, or you're going to hand me a track to convert me, or you're going to enter into a relationship with me and have conversations around these things. Little differences of approach. If you just read this book,
Mm-hmm.
Ken Ham will convince you and you'll be okay. Or let's have a conversation. BioLogos is very relational and curriculum based, and
Okay.
maybe Ken Ham is. I think again, we talked about, which I wasn't planning on talking about, but in terms of like, different approaches. Are we going to have conversations and dialogues, or are we going to be defensive and create like an apologetic defensive? Here are the 6 things you need to believe, because if you don't take this part in Genesis literally, then you're not being faithful to the text. And what I've learned in this conversation and work with faith and science, there's many approaches to how we interpret and read and wrestle with the scriptures, and what Genesis is trying to do and what it's not trying to do. Listening to your creations episode with Joe and Christian was very helpful to talk about, some of those things of what is Genesis, plain reading of scripture. Just it says it there in the text. Well, you read in English or King James, or, this was written in Hebrew and Greek. And there's a lot of nuance to these stories and biblical scholarship you have to take into consideration, along with looking at the science of the world. So anyway, like if you're going to just like close a conversation down with a track and like a bullet point things that you have to believe, I'll listen to their approach to, or proofs of or arguments of why they think, young earth creation is the right way to go. But there's a lot of other resources out there as well who people take their faith and the Bible seriously without having that approach.
I think it's a good place to land. I can't believe someone just mailed you their stuff.
Yeah.
That's great. Here you go. This will either, like you said, either it was like here, this will fix you, or someone was actually trying to be helpful and you're like, this is not even remotely the direction we're trying to go.
Right. And but
we're not trying to open a theme.
They said, hey, I see that you're doing some faith and science work, and this is my approach. And do you want to have coffee and talk about why I think this book is more important than Francis Collins? But I don't know, or whatever. I'd be like, cool. Sure. I'm curious. I am so curious why people approach what they do. So like, dude, I'll have a coffee or beer with you any day to talk about that. But just to get it in the mail and okay, all
right. We'll have to go to the Ark sometime. We'll meet up at the Ark sometime and just explore it for ourselves.
That's right. And I think part of our project and our grant that we got, STEAM, Science and Theology for Emerging Adult Ministries, STEAM, it was a STEAM grant.
Okay.
It was the acronym that we use. And our approach was, and I've shared this in other podcasts too, like our approach was, we first were like, our project is going to be called Reconciling the Tension Between Faith and Science. And then we had a podcaster and a person in the work who were like, why do you want to reconcile the tension? We're like, well, because I don't like conflict. We want to solve it. We want peace. and he was like, look, if you, you have to have tension on the line for a musical instrument to play music. So you need tension on the string for a guitar or a piano or a violin. Now, when it's out of tune, it sounds horrible. But when it's tuned right, it's one of the most beautiful sounds you could hear. So how can we create a more harmonious conversation on the tension of the line of faith and science together? So we kind of instead of reconciling the tension, we were like embracing the tension. And part of that was like legitimately asking people what their questions are and say, this isn't a bait and switch. We're not going to shame you. We're just genuinely curious. And then to look at what those things are, but then to also say it's important to define terms. Like, don't just assume,
Yeah.
so yeah, you believe in God. Well, what do you mean by God? If you mean like an old man sitting on a cloud ready to throw lightning at me, checking his list, Santa Zeus, Santa Zeus
Santa
God
Zeus.
up there, checking the list, the naughty list, or throwing lightning at me. I don't believe in that God. Or same thing with our scientists, where we have an president of our congregation council is an evolutionary biologist. And he's like, look, as you have as many denominations in Christianity, you have that much diversity within the realm of like evolutionary biology and what people believe or doing research or trying to prove or disprove. And it's changing. There you go. Evolution changing. It's evolving as you go on. But if you just say like, do you believe in evolution? What do you mean by that term? What's your
Yeah.
approach to that? Yeah. And so, and then there are considerable amount of research and science which goes through the repeatable experimentations to try to get at what they believe or not believe, where people can say, yeah, I'm doing research to either prove or disprove this, or to grow an understanding. Even Al Goshaw, who I share with you, particle physicist at CERN, he's doing research now. He made an offhand comment like not that long ago that was like, oh, we're doing some research. Maybe how we understand physics is just completely wrong. The standard model may be just completely, I don't know. We'll see what happens. I'm like, what? The
We'll
standard model of physics may get turned upside down? Tell me more. He's like,
we'll
yeah, we're
see
trying to look.
what happens.
We'll see. So if you're using science, to prove or disprove God, be careful, because it may change. It's not that science is changing or it's unreliable. It's just that as new research and understanding comes to light, we may have a different approach to look at it. So let's not put God in the gaps. Let's not, just assume things. We can approach scripture and science in different ways that are not pitted against each other. He's studying like dark energy and dark matter and trying to figure out what that is, because the universe we're doing things is kind of weird that doesn't stack up against like how we understand physics to work on Earth. And so they're trying to get behind what are these things. Quantum physics works a little different than just regular standard model. So why is there differences? I mean, they're trying to figure those things out, and their curiosity and awe and wonder is what drives them to do it. So same way with our faith and understanding the universe. So yeah.
I wonder
and back to your creation. Sorry, I'm talking a lot, but then your
go ahead. No,
creation.
it's fine.
Your podcast with Joe and Christian was good. But one thing I wanted to chime in, I was listening. I was like, oh, I want to jump in. In terms of Genesis, in terms of understanding Genesis, that I tell my confirmation youth and people that it's not a science textbook. It's not meant to be a how-to science textbook. What the Hebrews were doing, it's a counter narrative to the competing understandings of God around them. And so they're trying to express who they believe about God and who humanity is within this hymn, poem, story, myth, whatever you want to use to express who they understand God to be. So in these other kind of pagan creation stories where the gods battle and they bleed out and the blood falls to the earth and humans grow out of the blood of loser gods, they're like, wait a minute, how do we who do we understand humans to be? And the Hebrews are like, hey, we may have come from earth, or out of the ground or evolved from somewhere, but God breathed life into us and says it is good. So that's the main message, rather than getting caught up on like the time frame of day and night and moon and stars and how old the universe is. Is the narrative of who they understand God to be and who we are in relationship to God and others. So that's what Genesis is trying to do. And I think that's what BioLogos is trying to do. They do a lot of work with evolutionary science, cosmology, to try to help people have a healthy understanding of what science is trying to say and what God's word is trying to say. So there's a lot of resource when it come to that. And so a lot of their work has been around that. And I would say it's not necessarily like a progressive like organization. There's a lot of conservative evangelicals
Okay.
that are part of BioLogos that go to evangelical churches that are both believe science and take God's word seriously. That's kind of their motto. So
All right. Also, I think you and I should sit down and write a comic book called Santa Zeus. I think we may have created something to pitch to
yes,
Dark Horse.
yes.
'Cause that might work
Santa
real well.
Zeus, and then down the yeah, it's kind of in the vein of like Jason Aaron angst of like what gods are worthy or not, and then but Santa Zeus
Sure.
versus
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I think we could. I love that.
I
I
think
know
we
some artist
could.
friends
I
that
think
could
we could.
help us with a depiction of
You
that.
have cool friends.
Looking. I
Artist
do, and you're
friends,
one of them,
friends
Brandon.
who
You're one of them,
oh,
Brandon.
thanks. I am a
Yeah,
ninja coach. I am the only ninja coach you know. I think. I hope.
yeah. I can honestly say you're the only ninja coach I know.
There we go. Let's talk a little bit now about so BioLogos' convention. You mentioned that you went
Yep.
and it was wonderful. Let's hear some of the highlights. What were some of your takeaways from the convention this year?
Yeah, I think, BioLogos has done a lot of work with cosmology and looking at the universe, age of the universe, and then evolution. But what I really kind of got out of this conference that I think that I could tell that they are being intentional about this is they had both male and female scientists. It just wasn't like white
Mm-hmm.
male scientists up at the mic talking. They had
Okay.
female scientists. They had people of color. They were trying to be more intentionally diverse to say like, look, there's a wide spectrum of people who are in the sciences and people of faith who are presenting these kind of keynotes. And there was a lot of creation care this go around. I think a theme was,
Hmm.
these important questions about how to interpret Genesis 1, 2, and 3 with evolution and the age of the universe. Yep, we get it. But also, how are we being good stewards of the universe? So a lot of like, let's be honest about what's going on in our environment, and some not so good news of where our Earth is heading and our impact on it. But then the hope of what we can do, and what's our call from God to be good stewards of creation and our relationships to it, especially coming after 2020, the political discourse to try to talk about how are we relating to one another. The AI, of course, was a big topic about the emergence of AI and how that tool can help us, and then also to think critically about that as well. And then and what those algorithms and AI is doing in our social media and how it's pitting us against one another, that people are using these things, these bots, these AI stuff, to be wary of social media algorithms, and to be more intentional with our relationships to one another. Francis Collins he's coming out with another book. I forgot the name of it, but he's coming out with a new book very soon. He
Okay.
did Language of God and he has other stuff, but he has a new book that's coming out, and he did the keynote the first night. And so it's cool being like a stone's throw of Dr. Collins, and
Nice.
hear him talk about this is the outline of my new book that's going to come pretty soon. And it was really kind of
cool.
how to have hope in this world. He was pretty critical about like social media and Twitter and all that stuff, and saying let's have some real conversations with folks and put our phones down and encourage our young people to put the phones down and get in nature and have conversations, and that kind of stuff. The science behind people who create these apps and scrolling to keep us glued to it rather than having conversation with others. So those are pretty good things. And then they had, like you have a conference, you have display tables of people selling books and resources and things like that, which was cool. And so those are some of the highlights. And then
Nice.
like it's the after conversations, right? You hear the keynote, you go to
Yeah.
the workshop, then you connect with somebody. Oh, I didn't know you were going to be here. Oh, you're here. Oh, you're a member of that church right down the road from me. Cool. Let's go grab a sandwich. Let's go grab a beer and have conversations. So that was pretty cool. I met a couple cool epidemiologists at Duke who were on the forefront of understanding COVID and on the forefront of vaccines and doing their work to help with public health. And so they led some workshops, and I was like, oh, you're right down at Duke. We should have more conversations here around this. So So that was cool. I'll make another plug. So the Sacred Chain,
Yeah. Okay.
by Jim Stump. He's the host of BioLogos's podcast, The Language of God. And this is how understanding evolution leads to deeper faith. And so he did some episodes. He did some episodes on the BioLogos podcast leading up to this book, some chapters. Let's see, what was the name of? So like, um, Da, 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 da. So he did some episodes on Language of God called the Challenge of the Bible, the Challenge of Time, the Challenge of Pain and Suffering. How that
Okay.
those things are questions. Of course, there's the big three. And when I'm asking students
Mm-hmm.
what their questions are, yeah, Challenge of the Bible, Challenge of Time, the Challenge of Pain and Suffering are up there in the top 5, top 3 questions people have about faith and science and life. And so he did it's a beautiful podcast of him just sharing, I guess, what's in his book. But I had to buy the book too because he was there. We both had the same haircut, so that was kind of fun. But really good dude, and I highly recommend that book, especially if
Okay.
you're wrestling with or curious approaches to evolution and our faith and how they can work together.
Okay. So, man, hopefully in 2 years it'll be in the Chicagoland area, and I can maybe sneak on
I'll
up
come
there.
to it.
Yeah, there we go. Or something more in the middle for the two of us. We can meet up there.
Mm-hmm.
So, you were also a stone's throw from Philip Yancey. You texted me that one night too. You're a stone's throw from a lot of people, apparently.
Yeah. He was one of the keynotes. I missed the keynote, but he was there. He has a book and had some things going on that he was doing, and he's legendary on the book front and Christian spirituality. And I was curious how it tied to science, but yeah, I was sitting in the back this time so I could get out and either explore if I got fidgety or get coffee. And I tend to get in trouble because I talk a lot with people when I'm not supposed to. Happening in school, happens in church sometimes. But during one of the keynotes, I was probably talking, I had a conversation with somebody, and I turned over and I could see Philip Yancey. I felt this burning on the back of my head, and I turned to look, and it was his eyes staring at me, kind of like, "Hey, can you be quiet? I'm trying to listen to this." So I can say I got the stink eye from Philip Yancey. There you go.
There you go. Also, for those of you who have never been to a conference with Philip Yancey at it, one of his descriptors is adventurer. And Pastor Will and I were trying to come up with other cool descriptors that we could throw on our taglines if we ever do conferences. Surfer. Yeah, I mean, you're the surfer boy. Silver Surfer, if you wanted to claim that one.
Legend. I could put legendary surfer on there, comma, and then you could put Ninja Coach. You could put Ninja Coach. So that's
I would love that. Tell us a little bit about the panel you helped host, or you did host.
Yeah. So I'm in relationship with Science for the Church, and one of their directors and employees, funders, Drew Miller. He lives in Raleigh, right down the road. And we've done some collaborating together with Faith and Science and that kind of stuff. And so they were able to have their own table at the conference and then also lead one of the workshops. So one of the workshops we led was how to help ministers, particularly targeted for ministers, to explore how they can engage science in their congregations and be science friendly, or to navigate the tension that's there if people get wigged out by it or get defensive by it, or those kinds of things, and to kind of create some conversation. And we had a room of about 30-40 people, men and women from all over the country, even somebody from Hawaii. She came all the way from Hawaii to this conference, and just kind of we were able to share our stories of how we integrate conversations with faith and science in our congregations, and mainly that pastoral approach of creating a safe space for questions, to let people know that their thoughts and feelings are valid, and here are some resources to reach out to help us those things. But we had some Duke Divinity students, who were there, and then we also had a man who drove himself up from Georgia, who is 99 years old.
Wow.
And he's turning 100 this summer. And one of the latest
Wow.
emails that Science for the Church put out was kind of his story. And he
Hmm.
had a World War II vet hat on. And so I'm like, dude, here's somebody who, there's not too many World War II vets
No.
around anymore, but here he is. And then, he was, after the war, did some teaching and really has a heart for faith and science, and not having the Ken Ham debates as much as BioLogos
Sure.
conversations. Was
Well,
his
good.
concern. Yeah.
Well, good. Well, thank you for doing that too. Trying to get some good resourcing into the hands of. You said there were some Duke Divinity students there, so young people trying to get into ministry for the first time. Thank you for doing that, and for having this heart for. What did you say earlier? Not removing the tension, but for harmonizing with the tension. Is that what you said earlier? Yeah.
Embracing the tension and knowing that there can be pretty music and gorgeous music to help. If the fabric of the universe is built on strings or string theory or vibrating quantum strings, perhaps there's something to why we connect with string instruments and music and humming and those kinds of things. Perhaps there's a connection there. And so I think, if you hear an out of tune cello or violin, it's one of the worst things you've ever heard. But if they're in harmony with one another and the orchestra of bands trying to play one song, it's gorgeous. So that's what we're trying to do. Let people know about that.
And I think if there's anything worth taking from this conversation we've had today, one, a whole bunch of great resources to go check out. Pastor Will dropped 7 books or something. But I think there is something that brings these two together, faith and science, and it's awe and wonder. Those are the two things that really branch these two. And I think if you're, especially, I'll talk more to Christians, because I know probably more Christians than scientists do listen to this show, but you never know. Right. I think when our faith becomes this very rigid, either very rigid set of ethics or very rigid information, this is the truth, and we lose the awe and wonder in things, I think we might be missing the boat a little bit here. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we often create on those who are all in the science, no religion camp, create this straw man or straw woman of a person of faith who's holding their Bible, waving it, saying, nope, I'm only going to read this literally. And I don't care about what you have to say. And then, but really most Christians are those who are reading the text and wrestling with life and wrestling with love and sin and brokenness and looking for hope and longing for a savior and coming, gathering with other people who are wrestling with those same things or longing for those same things, who have a genuine heart for wanting more out of this world, looking for salvation or restoration. So that's the most, not ready to throw a Bible at you because you disagree with them. And then the other side, Christians see scientists, they're out there doing experiments to disprove God. When most scientists are like the member of my church who is an evolutionary biologist who just loves the research she's doing with toads out in Arizona and their mating practices and how they evolve and what they're doing and how they relate to one another. So she's just fascinated by these toads. They go out every summer to do research. I don't know the exact name, but that's her love, and so she's curious, whether a cosmologist or looking at biology, or my own daughter who's in sustainable evolutionary environmentalism at App, who loves digging in the dirt and exploring about healthy soil and earthworms and all those things. She's just captivated and wanting to see that. So that's the most of the pain. Those are the people, not the extremes. And so I think the thing about post-COVID and COVID is that we kind of saw science unfold in real time. And so we kind of saw how it can shift. Well, you need masks or you don't need masks, or here's the vaccine. Well, maybe you need this vaccine. So usually it takes a long time, a lot of research, a lot of peer reviews, but we are watching it happen on in real time and don't know how science works. So therefore, we throw up this skeptic. Oh, well, it could change tomorrow. Why should I believe him today? Well, yes,
Right.
science evolves and grows and things. And the same thing we understand about like the Bible and the language and the culture of its day and the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls and,
Mm.
help us grow in understanding those things. So that's the patience that I think we should hold with one another when we're having these conversations, not assume the worst in others, but to say, oh, what's your genuine curiosity and awe and wonder that really strikes a chord in your heart and
Hmm.
mind, to that you vibe with. And yeah, so I think that's what gives me energy and hope. And that conference, seeing people,
Nice.
they are genuinely curious about those things and want to explore those things in their faith communities, um, gives me hope and gave me hope, and will continue to
Good.
do that.
That's good. I love listening to people. I mean, you're being the middleman in this scenario, but I love listening to people talk about their jobs, especially
Yeah.
the people who are excited about their jobs,
Mm.
because I'm like, look, studying toads, not my thing. But I will listen to you talk about how much you love studying toads because
Yeah.
I don't know anything about it. It's not, and I would not choose to do that with the rest of my life. But this, good for this person to be like, yeah, I go study toads in Arizona every summer.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and that's the thing. Everybody geeks out on something, right? It says
Right.
ecology. Everybody geeks out on something. So it could be like your favorite fandom or story or book or fantasy, sci-fi. But there's also people geek out in their jobs. And same with like Al Goshaw at CERN. Like they're smashing these quantum particles together with this hydra collider, over and over and over again. It sounds, oh, they're discovering unfolding the fabric of the universe. But most of the time, they're just like crunching numbers and smashing particles together, and it's the same thing. Every day they're just gonna doing their thing, and at some point they may hit, something new or something
Hmm.
emerge that changes how people think about things. But ho hum, we go to work and smash these particles together and crunch some numbers and see what difference it makes in how the universe works.
That's crazy. It's all
Yeah.
the math. It's all the math that kicks me out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm with you
No.
100%.
Pastor Will, thank you for coming on and doing this great conversation. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. And hopefully, you got a lot of good takeaways from here, whether it's the resources, the call for awe and wonder, or to pray over the fact that apparently everything we know about physics might be wrong. And we should really pray for scientists to straighten that out, hopefully, eventually,
Yep.
straighten all that out for us. But yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you, Pastor Will, again for being here. As always, most of those resources that Pastor Will brought up are going to be in the description of this episode, so you can go check out BioLogos and these books that Will also referenced as well. You can also, if you would like to support the show financially, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com/MSLpod, leave a one-time donation, or you can choose to do a monthly recurring donation. Everyone who does that at the $9 a month tier gets a shout out. So thank you, Lori, for supporting the show. Share this episode with someone who you think could get something out of it. We talked a lot about resourcing today. So if you got a pastor who you know is like, got a congregation who's asking these questions, or they themselves are asking these questions about the relationship between faith and science, this would be a great episode to pass along to them. And that's it. Next week is our special Schools Out edition of the show. No hard theological or scientific conversations going on. I can guarantee that, because next week on the show, Christian Ashley will be back to review the not critically acclaimed film 300 Rise of an Empire. We talked about 300 back during the fall, during the Ancient Greece series. We're going to run it back on the sequel and talk about it. It's not great.
I've not seen the sequel. I loved 300. That was oh man, that was a game changer in a lot of ways. But the sequel I have not. So maybe I'll watch that one night and listen to you guys review it.
I will tell you this, no spoilers, but it's not a game changer. But we do have a great conversation. I'll tease this. We do have a great conversation because there was supposed to be a third film, and the rights to that movie have reverted back to Zack Snyder. So we do talk a lot about that as well. Little tease for next week, but until next time, this is Brandon signing off, reminding you as always that theology and science can be for everyone with the right resources, so keep on studying.